Author is funded by the Pacific Northwest Writers Association, supporting writers from pen to publication since 1955. To learn more about the PNWA and their yearly conference, please go to pnwa.org. Hi, this is Bill Kenower of Author Magazine, and today I'm in the Seattle home of David Laskin, author of The Family. David, welcome to Author.
Thank you, Bill.
David, can you remember, I know you were a voracious reader when you were a young man.
That's right.
But I don't want to presume that that's where it began. Can you remember when the whole idea that story mattered to you, not necessarily to the world, but to you, lit up in your mind?
Huck Finn.
Huckleberry Finn.
Huckleberry Finn was the first book that I read that I got totally lost in. And I was a slow reader, and I read it when I was young, so I was lost for a long time. Wow. I was going down the Mississippi at about the same rate that Huck was. But yeah, that was when I just thought, I read probably the way most people read, to get lost in somebody else's voice, somebody else's story, somebody else's word, somebody else's world. And that happened to me for the first time completely, where everything was sealed off. I was in my attic in my parents' house on Long Island, but that's where I was physically, but mentally I was down the Mississippi with Huck.
So that's where it started for you.
That's where it started.
Well, but no, so you're an author now. You've written, we were just trying to count it up. We think maybe 10 books?
Too many. Yeah, let's go with 10.
All right. And for a lot of those now, especially within the last 10 years, you've been going out and reading for part of publicity and meeting your readers, yeah?
All the time. And
a very common experience is the understanding that each reader has, in a way, almost read a different book sometimes.
Oh, yes. Yeah. This came as a total shock to me. With The Children's Blizzard, which was 2 books back, my first book that was really narrative driven by the story about these kids. And it's all true, it's not made up. I don't write fiction, I write history. This is a book about kids who were trapped by a killer winter storm that hit the Midwest in 1888. And it's called The Children's Blizzard because many of the victims were children in these one-room prairie schoolhouses. And I did a lot of speaking and a lot of meeting with book groups in promoting the book. And I still remember I was here in Seattle and I met with 2 book groups. One was a group of young women scientists. And they said, we really like the book, but we wish there were more meteorology. The chapter on meteorology was so compelling, and we just wish you'd gotten into the storm more. And then a couple of weeks later, I met with a group. It was also female, older women who read mostly fiction and, kind of popular stuff. And they said, we really related to the children and their stories, but that chapter on meteorology was so boring. And so who could follow highs and lows and, vortices and what creates the wind? No, that was just a bridge too far. We skipped it. So yeah, everybody brings their own things to the book.
In reading The Family, what struck me, and I thought about it again, having seen a lecture you gave on this subject, you touched on this subject, which is the role of imagination even in what is historical narrative.
Right.
Because The Family the book is a beautifully rendered book, and it couldn't be beautiful unless it was a felt experience.
Oh, absolutely.
And to do that, simply giving me the facts won't work. You have to use something that we call the imagination, which I know nonfiction writers don't like to always address, but it seems to me you have to use it.
Oh, no, I totally agree with you, and I will happily address it because I think it's the magic ingredient that makes the difference between a pedestrian book and a book that people really respond to. But for me, and I suspect a lot of other nonfiction writers feel the same, my imagination becomes most fertile, let's say, or most expressive when I am most steeped in 2 things, fact and feeling. And the facts come, the way facts come from archives, research, interviews, but the feeling often comes from having been in the place. And for every book that I've written, well, I shouldn't say every, pretty much, I always try to visit the graves of the people I've written about. And people go, what are you going to learn there? We get the gravestones, and okay, it's in a field in Nebraska, or it's in a cemetery in the Bronx, or Israel, where some of my relatives lived and died. But that's when I get the feeling. Standing, this is a little woo-woo, but I'm not averse to woo-woo-ness. Standing by their graves. The other thing is, it's a way of paying respect. you're writing, you're taking somebody else's story and inevitably making it your own. So I feel like the least I can do is stand by their grave and go, thank you. But I also feel, I don't know, there's something that channels into me that helps spark my imagination. If I don't know enough, I can't write. If I don't feel enough, I can't imagine. So those two mesh.
You focus on this at the end of The Family, talking about making it your story.
Right.
And I think that the writer has to do that because it's passing through you. Even if you're doing like what Eric Larson does, which is really even more journalistic than what you do or doing now.
Right.
It's passing through you. Oh. So how can it not be your story? It's affecting you as you're telling it.
Right.
And it should. I hope it would.
Oh, totally. And I think it's important to acknowledge that, you know, it was interesting in the process of writing the book, I very early decided that it was not going to be written in the first person. And my thought process was, these are not my stories, these are the stories of my ancestors that I'm telling. So I'm going to introduce the book in the first person, kind of set it up, and then bow out and give them their stories. And then at the very end, I'll come back. And I realized when I came back, and if you read the book carefully, you'll see at the end of the introduction, I say, these are their stories. And at the end of the conclusion, I go, this is my story. And so, yeah, I pondered that a lot. And people said to me, well, how did you make the choices? I mean, I have this big family, hundreds of relatives I discovered, many of whom were quite fascinating. Why did I choose the 10 I chose, you know, to write about? And I thought, well, I didn't even have to think about it. I knew exactly who they were going to be. And they were like, how did you know? I don't know. Well, now that I think about it, I knew because it was I was telling a story that I wanted to tell. And if my brother were writing them, I have a brother who's a writer, an excellent writer. If he were writing it, he would have chosen different stories, different relatives, different narrative.
Which brings me to a quote I'd love you to maybe expand upon a little bit. Maybe there's nothing more to say. So this is right at the end of the book. Okay. I'm not going to give away too much.
Okay, yeah.
But in the second to last paragraph, you say, in telling their story, I've made it my own. Right. And you talk about how there's some things maybe we don't want to talk about.
Okay.
And then you say this. And to me, this sums up all of the human condition in one sentence.
Well,
you nailed it.
Thank you.
And yet, just as we cannot unblind ourselves, and you're referring to the things that you can't you lived or know about, so we cannot will our curiosity or channel its consequences. It's beautiful. We cannot will our curiosity. So talk about that.
Yeah, you know, that was the sentence I struggled with, but we were talking about this before. It came from something I strongly believe, which is I love gardens. I love butterflies. I love my dogs. I love my wife and my family. But I'm really not interested in sports. Okay, confession here. I probably just alienated half of your audience, but too bad. I like to play sports. I cannot make myself go, yeah, those Mariners. I mean, I can be polite and go, yeah, it's kind of having a good season, but I cannot will my curiosity. And so when I realized that, I thought, okay, as writers, we write about what we're curious about. I mean, that's kind of where it comes from. So if you're really not interested in sports, you're probably not going to write a great book about, you know, the winning, the Seahawks. I mean, that was kind of cool. I'm glad I watched that game. But I'm not the person to write the Seahawks Super Bowl season. So what you're curious about, where does it come from? I don't know. It's just there. And just the same, well, you know, the sentence I think says it probably far better than I'm expanding on. But so, you know, when I realized that, I thought, okay, this really does reflect my passions, my obsessions with history, with family, with what we can discover. But the other thing, you know, the other part of it is, I think that we believe if we know enough, if we research enough, and if we're empathetic enough, we can know everything. But we can't. And they're blind spots that we will have no matter how hard we try. I'm partially colorblind. I will never be able to see those red flowers. You're going to look out the window and go, whoa, those beautiful red flowers, and I'm the one who planted them, and I can't see them.
You're the one who takes care of them,
I take care of them, and I still can't see them. I see something, but I don't see what my wife sees or what the average person sees. The same is true for what's going on in the Middle East today, or global warming, or what's happening in Iraq. I mean, we think, well, I read the newspaper, I know this, but a generation hence they'll go, how could they have been so blind?
That's right.
And so I think it's humbling to realize that, but once you know that, I also think it's kind of liberating that you know, those are your strengths and your weaknesses. Your curiosity is your strength and your blindness is your weakness. And to acknowledge that, to know that's where your stories come from, I think gives you a real leg up.